Welcome back. Welcome to session 2. Today we are going to marry the de trempe, which we've already made, and the barrage, which is that butter portion, which we're about to prepare. And I want to go over a little bit of vocabulary. So we've talked about the de trempe, we've talked about the barrage. When we put those two things together, that whole thing is referred to as the paton, P-A-T-O-N. Just in case you're looking at a professional text later, that's what the whole piece of laminated dough is called. What we're going to do first to bring those two together is called the lock-in, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the process of enclosing that butter within the dough. There's several ways to do it. We're going to do the envelope method. I would take a look at your handout and my diagrams here. I don't know if you can tell that they're hand-drawn, but I would take a look at those before we get started. After we do the lock-in, then we're going to start on our turns. And doing the turns and timing the turns is probably the most crucial part of your croissant dough, and it's the most determining factor in how it looks in the end. The turn itself is just simply rolling the dough out and folding it onto itself. A single turn usually means rolling the dough out and folding it into thirds. You might see in other recipes or in puff pastry recipes something that's referred to as a book turn, and that's where you're rolling it out and folding it into 4. But for our croissant dough, we're just going to do 3 single turns. So 3 times we're going to roll it out and fold it into thirds. Now, the thing that makes croissant dough tricky is timing those turns. We're going to do our turns about every 45 minutes, but unfortunately, since I'm not with you and I can't feel your dough, and the ambient temperature where you are and in your fridge is going to be different, we're going to have to kind of rely on me describing what your dough should feel like. But to give you an overview of sort of conceptually what we're talking about, when we're working with our croissant dough, we have these 2 components. We have the de trempe and the barrage. And when we roll those out, they're going to be moving in opposite directions. So the de trempe with the gluten in it is going to be, the gluten is going to be activated, and that de trempe is going to tighten up as we work with it. The barrage, the butter component, is of course going to warm up and loosen up as we work with it. So when we do those turns, those 2 separate components are going to move in opposite directions. And so we need to rest the dough in between each turn so that they kind of come back into harmony. So when we rest the dough in the fridge, the gluten has a chance to relax, and then the butter has a chance to firm up. So we're back in equilibrium, and we can roll the dough out and maintain the even structure of those layers. If you don't wait in between your turns, you probably wouldn't even be able to do it. Your dough would get too stiff, your butter would spill out everywhere, it would not be pretty. So we're going to do our first turn right after the lock-in. Then we're going to put our dough in the fridge, wait 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, before we do our second turn. And then we're going to wait one more time and do our third turn. Once that process is done, you can pause. You can freeze that dough, you can hold it overnight, you can do the other things in your life that you might need to do. But for this period of time between the lock-in and the turn, you've got to stay with your dough and kind of babysit it. So make sure that once you start working on your lock-in and your 3 turns, once you start the content of this video, that you have about 2.5 hours set aside where you're available to deal with your dough. So we're going to prepare the barrage. I've pulled this out of the fridge about 30 minutes in advance. We want it to just start to soften up a little bit, but still feel nice and cold and firm. When we're preparing the barrage, what we're trying to keep in mind is we want something that's going to be cold and not melt into our dough, but we also want it to be flexible so that it doesn't crack when we go to roll out that dough. So the way we're going to achieve that is I'm going to take this, if you have a pound of butter or a print, you can just cut it in half, like so. If you have sticks of butter, they'll just unwrap them and arrange them. So I'm cutting this in half. I've got a piece of plastic wrap. I'm gonna put down a little bit of flour. I'm gonna lay these 2 pieces out to create kind of a square. It'll look more like a rectangle if you have sticks of butter, which is totally fine. Then I'm gonna put a little flour on top, and I'm gonna wrap this up. And I'm going to fold this with a little bit of a perimeter so that I'm making about an 8-inch square with the plastic. And that plastic is going to sort of define the size of our barrage, which we want to be sort of approximately an 8-inch square. So we want to make that edge nice and even. Yeah, so I'm using the saran wrap as a form for the barrage. Okay, next we're going to take a heavy rolling pin. I'm going to move my knife. Next, we're gonna take a heavy rolling pin and we're gonna whack this dough several times on each side and get it nice and flexible. So it's gonna be loud. Okay. I'm already cheating. I'm breaking my rule. I'm just gonna rotate this. Keep hitting it. Okay, my plastic has come undone. Not a problem. I'm just gonna start over here with my square that I'm trying to make. There we go. And I'm gonna flip this over and work on the other side. So the butter should still feel cool to the touch, but it should start to kind of have some give to it. Now, if this is getting into less than a square shape, what you can do is just pick it up and kind of gently hit those sides. Also, mine's kind of separating at that seam, so I'm just gonna get in there and kind of massage those together on both sides. So we don't want that to split apart as we're rolling out our dough. Okay. Let's try this again. Okay, this looks good. It's gotten into a little bit of a weird shape, which is fine. I'm just gonna tap those edges there and bring this back into a square. Okay, our barrage now is in a good shape and it's at a good consistency. And what we're looking for here is we want it to, like I said, feel cool to the touch, but if we press on it, it has some give to it. It doesn't feel 100% firm. The reason, like I said before, the reason we want that is because we want to make sure that when we go to roll this, the butter doesn't crack. So we want this to move smoothly with the dough itself, but we don't want it to get so warm that it starts to pool in the dough on the ends. And this is, I would say this is about a 1/2 inch thick.